I'd also like to introduce Judy Smith, our secretary, Maria Beltran, who's a board member, Yana Cowan, who's a board member, Christina, who doesn't seem to be on video yet. Lisa Cassidy is also a board member. Have I missed anybody? Any of our board members? And Steve Price, who is our former president. And I'm thrilled to welcome Michael Thompson as our keynote speaker. Michael actually spoke to OATAG once before when we had a conference in Cottage Grove. He's the author of many, many books, 200 articles. He's an experienced classroom teacher. He's also consulted with the William and Mary College of Gifted Education, which is known for its outstanding TAG curriculum. I'm not going to say much more because I don't want to waste his speaking time. So, Michael, take it away.
Thank you. Thank you, Margaret, and thank you to the board and everyone who's made this possible. It's special for me. It's an honor for me. I'm glad to return, even if it's virtually. I'm a little bit shaggy now. I have not been out of the house since March. I have hunkered down to avoid the virus. I would not do well if I got the virus, and so I'm a little more scruffy than I normally would be, but I think I'm doing the right thing. And so I appreciate the opportunity to be here. It's not easy to travel now. Let me see if I can get this to be what it looks like. How does that look to you? Is that okay? Were you able to see that slide? No? No? All right, let me try this.
There we go.
Now, how does it like you? Does that work?
It looks, we're seeing our poster.
Good, excellent. All right, that I'm happy about that. So let me begin because 45 minutes will go by quickly. Again, thank you for inviting me. I have thought about your theme, reading, writing, and reflecting, inspiring literate learners. I thought about it in great depth, not only for this presentation, but during decades of my life. And so what I want to do today is talk turkey. I want to look at what I view to be the inner truths about literature and reading and the effect that they have on gifted children. Because I think that the literature is underestimated, widely so, in our current school systems. The case I would make is that reading is the essence of education. It's the one thing that must be there. And I don't mean tapes or videos. I mean books. We need kids to read books, complete books. And language must be seen. Just hearing it doesn't have the same effect. If kids read the books and then later hear the audio, that's fine. But we want gifted kids to be readers, actual readers of fiction and nonfiction. So the case I would make is that reading is the necessary experience. There is no alternative to it. And it provides the essential elements of knowledge and in lots of dimensions that I want to look at quickly in our talk. Literature infuses kids with 1,000 kinds of happiness. That's what happens. When you have a massive encounter with literature, you are infused with innumerable abilities and experiences and vocabulary and punctuation and ethical dilemmas and complicated sentences, and on and on and on. 1,000 kinds of happiness. So I would like for everyone to think about these words, not in terms of, well, what are we doing at our school, but what would I want for my own child? And that might be different from what's happening at school. What do you want for your own child? And particularly for gifted kids, but honestly for everyone, our goal is not to provide the least education we can get away with. It is to provide the best education, the most education that we can devise. We want to elevate the ceiling of challenge for everyone. And yet, I don't have to tell you that is not what always has happened. We have seen educational movement one after another that have minimized the actual educational expectations. We over the decades that I've been teaching, I've had to weather storms. Grammar is bad. It's bad to teach grammar. You should not teach grammar. You damage the poor dears. Punctuation is bad. You don't want to correct anything. Direct construction and vocabulary is bad. Academic writing is bad because then, you don't want to correct their writing. You don't want to suggest that what they wrote is not, wonderful. Classics are bad. Classics are bad for various reasons. And poetry. So, that's what we've had to weather. I've been through climate after climate that was hostile to my vocabulary instruction or my grammar instruction or my expectation that kids would actually read. Now, there isn't time to talk about all of these. There isn't really time to talk about even one of these, but I want to give a shot. I want to give a shot to one of them. Let's focus on one of these bad things, and that's literature. What a bad thing. In the end, it's about what we read. Our own minds, in terms of education, our minds are a response to what we have read. Have we actually read? Not have we done activities or have we done worksheets or, what have we read? What have we actually read? Education comes from books. And all my educational life, for the first 20 years of my life, this was never an issue. Every English course I ever took had a stack of books. On the first day of school, there'd be a stack of classics on each of our desks. And it was so exciting. It was like Christmas Day. I couldn't wait to read those books. I'd heard of every one of them, and I looked forward to them so much. And it was never an issue. None of my teachers ever seemed to think it was difficult to incorporate. I knew there was no sense of there's no time or there's no money, or literature was a given. The question was, what time did you have for anything else in between the literature? And yet, I don't have to tell you that there's a decline in literature in the country. In many school systems, not all, thankfully, but in many school systems, children read fewer books. They read shorter books. They read easier books. They read books with no vocabulary, like The Old Man and the Sea, if they do read a book. It's all contemporary books. They don't learn to read back through time. Sometimes it's graphic novels. I'm not even going to repeat the word. I go to conferences, I go to workshops, and I hear teachers talk as though real literature programs are impossible now. I had a group of principals in Colorado. We were all sitting in a big circle, and I said, well, okay, how many months do you have available? Because they were all taking tests. They spent all year taking tests, preparing for state tests. And I said, okay, how many months do you have available where we could do a literature program? And they said, oh, you don't understand. no months. There is no time available for a literature program. We have canceled all of our literature programs. What are they doing then? They're doing skill drills. They're doing skill drills. They're identifying the skills that are required on the state test, and they're doing skill drills. And anyway, we would have to have the time for literature, and we'd have to buy the books. Oh no, buy the books. What would happen to the football program? I love football. I'm not anti-football. So what happens is that as an education nation, we've created an array of a whole ecosystem of classroom activities that circumvent reading. The kids are busy, but it's not reading. Reading gets circumvented. And there's a profitable industry of non-reading strategies. All these things to do rather than read. Workbooks. There's a new ecosystem of educational language. You hear odd locutions of educational language. Language is discussed in an alienating manner. Clinical language, it degrades the reading experience. Well, we are now going to read some informational texts. What's that? Are you talking about nonfiction? Please say nonfiction. Please say something human and literate. See? Oh no, this is an informational text. And you sense the objectification of the literary experience. So how are we supposed to create, inspire literate children if this is the atmosphere? If this is the atmosphere. The language is cold. I mean, think about this language. Think how alien this language is. Let's go to the bookstore and buy an informational text. Let's go to the bookstore and buy an informational text. Come on, kids, let's go buy an informational text. I think tonight I'll curl up with a good informational text. I mean, what? I don't want to read texts. Behind me on my shelves, I don't have texts. I have Robert Louis Stevenson. I have Treasure Island. I have Great Expectations. I have Jane Eyre and Wuthering Heights and Pride and Prejudice. I have Frederick Douglass back there. I want to read books. I want to read novels. I want to read biographies. I want to read histories. Last year, I read 8 biographies of Alexander the Great, one after another. I wasn't reading texts. I want to meet real fictional people. And that's not an oxymoron. Tell that to, Scout Finch. I want brilliant kids to have brilliant books, not a dumbed down anthology. Of course, these days you can't read an anthology because you might be in danger of reading a chapter. And we don't read chapters or excerpts anymore. We read passages. I want children to read, regardless of their age. I want kids to read fabulous books, fiction and nonfiction, to encounter the mind of the world. I want them to encounter the mind of the world. So I'm hearing these things. I'm hearing things that I have never heard in my life. I'm hearing things about literature instruction that I have never heard in my life. at educational conferences, at gifted conferences from teachers of gifted kids. I heard this one. This was a question from a teacher. What books can my students read that don't have all those words? What? That's what I want. I'm searching for books that have those words, those words, those words, right? I mean, what? Yeah. Shouldn't I have my students read a modern version of Shakespeare? No. That's why Shakespeare is Shakespeare. Don't change the words. No. Why should students read those old books? Well, what do we think? Do we think that all the great books are modern? I mean, what? Do we not want kids to read any of the masterpieces from the centuries? I want us all to read masterpieces. I want us to learn to read masterpieces. I got this one from a teacher. How can I make those books interesting? Now, I'm teaching 8 courses online. I'm teaching 8 English courses, full year-long English courses online now. I don't have to do anything to get all my kids interested. They're so excited they can't even sit up straight. I'm teaching 350 students this year, and they're all chomping at the bit to read, finally to read some fabulous literature. They want to. I heard this at a school system in South Carolina. Well, we don't teach literature anymore. Our administration tells us literature is inappropriate. Have you heard that one? I almost fell over dead. I mean, my heart is only so strong. What? Literature is inappropriate? And this one, our administration tells us it's wrong to teach complete texts. What do you mean you don't finish books? That means you don't even, they don't even read full chapters. They read passages so they can get better scores on their state test. That's the game there. It's good for the school. It's not good for the kid. It's good for the school. We must only teach passages. That's what they said. I had a whole crowd of teachers around me at the end of the day, and they were all saying, well, we're only allowed to teach passages. What? What do you mean? Passages. Is that what education is? That stuff right there? Well, the answer is no. That's not what education is. Instead of this, Billy Bones, that's Billy Bones in the first chapter of Treasure Island. I remember him as if it were yesterday, as he came plodding to the inn door, his sea chest following behind him in a hand barrel. A tall, strong, heavy, nut brown man, his tie pigtail falling over the shoulder of his soiled blue coat, his hands ragged and scarred with black, broken nails, and the saber cut across one cheek, a dirty, livid white. I remember him looking round the cove and whistling to himself as he did so, and then breaking out in that old sea song he sang so often afterwards. 15 men on a dead man's chest, yo ho ho, and a bottle of rum. Instead of this. Passages turn the mind down to skills, not up to humanity. If we want to inspire children, literate children, we do that with humanity. We need to make education We need to enhance the humanity of our education. You know, the inspiration comes from the humanity. We don't remember Frankenstein because of skills, any skills we've ever studied. We remember it because of the monster, the poor, pitiful monster who was all sewed together out of pieces of corpses. And all he wanted was to be a person. And the people wouldn't have anything to do with them. He taught himself to read. He's not like that guy in the movies. He's not like that. The Frankenstein of the book he teaches himself to read. And he wants to be a friend, and he brings firewood to the suffering family. And he was the person, and the people in the book were the monsters to him. And he was lonely and cold. We remember Frankenstein because of him. It's him. It's not anything to do with passages or skills or worksheets or any of that, activities. It's because of his feelings. They hurt his feelings. Those people hurt his feelings. That's why we remember him. It's not about chapters or excerpts or passages. It's about books. Auden said this: some books are undeservedly forgotten. None are undeservedly remembered. I mean, are you educated? Yes, I've done many activities. Are you educated means are you well read? That's what it means. If all you've done is 12 years of activities, that will not make you educated. All right, some details. You know some of the things that get avoided: long books, old books, and so forth. We have to assign long books. We have to find a way to assign long books, and this was never a problem in my first 20 years of my life. All my English teachers assigned us long books. It was typical to be assigned a novel that was 500 pages long. Nobody found it challenging. We all did it. We all look forward to it. If we want students to be educated, they have to know what it means to finish major works. I mean, do we want them to go to college and all they've ever read is passages? Do they not know what it means, to read 500-page long novels? What is the reason? What is the educational reason that students wouldn't read long books? See, I don't think it has anything to do with kids. It's a school system detail. But you don't make a mind out of samples. If all you've ever done is a little taste of Dickens and a little taste of Austen, you don't know Austen, you don't know Dickens. Think about it, almost all famous works are long. They're all long. What's not? The Declaration of Independence, I guess, is not. Murders in the Rue Morgue is 50 pages long, but it's challenging, at least. Students have to learn to sustain their attentions. I want them challenged just by sheer length. I want them to snap out of it and get used to reading long works. Long works. And I want them to think of it as normal, because it is. That's the form of most literature. Kids need the inspiring power of the whole story. It's important to their meaning. It's important to their feelings of humanity and meaning that they finish the story. They need to finish the story. What happens to, whoever? Mole and Ratty. What happens to Badger? What happens, what happens? What happens to Tiger Lily? We need to know. They need to know what happens. We have to assign old works. It's not a bad decision to assign a 19th century novel. That's a good decision. In fact, let's read several of them and adjust to the temperature. You only have to read about 3 of them, and then you can read them all. Once you've gotten through a few, then that's the key. That's the magic key. And then you can read them all. I want kids to be able to read back through time. Literature is among other things, literature is a time machine. You can do it. You can read Jane Austen and be transported back a couple centuries to a civilization and a language and an array of courtesies and all these things that are wonderful to know about and that you can participate in. You can be in those rooms with those people. Modernizations. A modernization is Shakespeare translated. Why would anyone translate Shakespeare? What that is Shakespeare minus Shakespeare. If you take the Shakespeare out of Shakespeare, then you get the modernization. 2 households, both alike in dignity, in fair Verona, where we lay our scene. From ancient grudge break to new mutiny, where civil blood makes civil hands unclean. It's a sonnet. It's the prologue to Romeo and Juliet. Look at the cool internal rhyme, grudge and blood. To new mutiny. Hear that? All this cool stuff going on. I do a full 1-hour presentation just on those 14 lines. There's so much poetry in these lines that it's all I can do to get through it in an hour. So what are we going to do? We're going to change this to ordinary, American slang? I don't think so. I mean, what do they think? Romeo and Juliet is famous just because of the plot? It's just about the plot? See, I want the kids to have the language. We want them to have the language. So let's look at some propositions. And think about these. Language is the core of all content. Whatever class you're in, the transaction happens in language. You got to be good at language. And high-level English is the fabric of academic discourse. So kids need massive exposure to high-level English. Do they get that? No. Not from passages. Literature is English at its highest level. Reading is the transforming experience in education. It's the one thing that changes kids more than anything else. It's the ultimate interdisciplinary content. It trains kids to articulate ideas in all fields. All fields. If you're a scientist, if you're a mathematician, you will benefit from massive exposure to literature because you learn to articulate ideas. Period. So literature accustoms us to great language, and we train our minds on hard books. The harder, the better. From literature, we get the hang. You know the hang. We get the hang of how to say things. We absorb it. Every novel teaches the tune of good grammar, the sound of direct objects, the flow that generates a direct object. We want the curriculum to provide for continuous reading, not just Old Man and the Sea in the first semester and of Mice and Men in the second semester. That won't cut it. Quantity does matter. During the year, students may read few books, but do hundreds of activities. Hundreds and hundreds of activities. And that's what they're doing instead of reading. Are you well educated? Let's look at that one more time. Yes, I've done a lot of activities. You know, later in life, people don't go through life recalling their activities. They go through life recalling Frankenstein, if they ever met him. So read. Do you hear me now? Okay. I don't know how that happened. Let me show you an actual class. This was a class I taught in 1994. So, you know, if you look, you see, we read the Iliad and the Aeneid and the Theban plays of Sophocles and Othello and the Inferno and Crime and Punishment and Cry the Beloved Country. We read all those things in class together. But then also the kids had to read 2 classics outside of class every quarter. That was an honors class. So what happened was we read these in class together, and then they had choices for their outside reading. So it wound up to be something like this. That's how much reading they did in my honors class. Plus, we did research papers and vocabulary and word within the word and all those things. But that's enough reading to change people. Not 1 book a semester. What about, let's think about every novel. Every novel is a student-centered experience. There's no teacher in the middle. When you're reading, it's you and Robert Louis Stevenson. Well, it's really you and Jim Hawkins, you and Master Hawkins, you know, you and Long John. You know, it's between the 2 of you. Every novel is an affective domain experience. What happens is that you care after you understand. We know that gifted kids are rereaders. And one of the things that happens is they keep rereading these books and they understand them better and better, and so they care more and more. Books are central. Once again, not tapes or videos. Language must be seen. We have to see it. For example, every novel is an extended spelling lesson. I learned to spell by reading. Before I ever got to school, I could spell already because I was a reader. You learn the look of words. You know, look at this. Look at the word look. You get to know it. You get a feeling for it. You know, each word has its own visual identity. It's like a face. Each word is like a face made of letters. And you get to know them as friends, and you know what they look like, made. Every novel differentiates homophones. Every novel is an extended punctuation exhibit. Often the punctuation follows the plot in a way that it's something that's never taught in schools. But look at this. Here's a 1-sentence paragraph, which is not supposed to exist. But that's what this is. It's a 1-sentence paragraph, and it's from A Christmas Carol. See? Here's an anxious person, expecting someone with anxious eagerness. She walked up and down the room, started at every sound, looked out of the window, glanced at the clock, tried, but in vain. See, and so it's all choppy and anxious and worried. And the punctuation mirrors the plot. But where is that ever discussed? You know? Every novel is an extended vocabulary study. And often it's vocabulary that kids do not already know. That's what we're looking for. We're trying to find vocabulary they do not already know. We want to push the edge of the envelope. This is from Peter Pan, chapter 14. Retort, disquieting, vitals, tallow, countenance, doublet, oft times, presentment, dissolution, placidly. Multiply this times 200 pages. Every novel is a spelling lesson, a vocabulary lesson. Frankenstein. If we look at Frankenstein, in my classic words database, it took me 3 pages just to list the words that I found. Okay, so let's zoom in on page 1. Look, these are nouns, these are adjectives, and these are verbs. That's the vocabulary of Frankenstein. Every novel, virtually every novel, unless you're talking about Of Mice and Men or Old Man on the Sea. Every novel is a powerful vocabulary lesson. I mean, let's see a worksheet beat that. Come on, Every novel demonstrates paragraphing. Every novel incorporates poetic elements. Students have to study poetry if they're going to learn to read novels. This is Badger. This is Badger from Wind in the Willows, a very good soul. We all love Badger. He's one of my favorite people. And, Ratty and Mole get lost in the blizzard, and they make it to his door just by accident. And he says, "Come in the kitchen. There's a first-rate fire dinner and supper and everything." Hear it? There's a first-rate fire dinner and supper and everything. That's how Badgers talk when they're in a good mood. That's how Badger talks to me. What do we mean? Do we mean that Kenneth Graham incorporated all those poetics in that sentence? You bet that's what we mean. Pick up any page of Wind in the Willows at random, and you'll see this stuff. We go to Moby Dick. Look at this. Here's a passage from Moby Dick. Look at this. See that? One serene and moonlight night when all the waves scrolled by like scrolls of silver. Moby Dick. The Scarlet Letter. Look at this very first sentence. It describes a crowd. Okay? It describes a crowd. Look at the consonants in that passage. Be very afraid of that crowd. That's a scratchy crowd. You don't want anything to do with that crowd. Every novel incorporates profound thinking. For some time, I did not believe Joyce on this. I had to think about it for a long time. And then, of course, as always happens, I realized that she was right. She's always right. It's one, that's how that works. The gifted child's major contact with the world of ideas is through literature. Now, my approach to literature is Socratic. I don't lecture to students about what books mean. It's a Socratic thinking problem, based on the Socratic paradox. In one of my classes once, we were reading Kafka. And so I asked them if they thought, what did they really think? Was this a story about a guy who actually did turn into a 6-foot bug? Or was it a story about a guy who was insane? And do you know, the kids were about evenly divided on that. So I went to the library and looked up the critical literature. And guess what? So was the critical literature. It was divided on that also, which I didn't expect. I just assumed it. I assumed the literature would say he was insane. But that wasn't what I found when I read the critical literature. So what I did with the kids is I just said, I'm going to put this question on the exam. You know, you have 9 weeks left before the exam, and bring your book because you can quote from it. And you better have an answer because you've got 9 weeks to think about it. Socratic. It's open-ended teaching. It opens up the mind. It opens up the mind. What I love is when the concepts are discovered by the kids. Like, I don't like to teach a set of books and then say, here are 3 books about authenticity. I don't want to do that. I want to say, here are 3 books. Let's see if we can determine, you know, what's visible in these books. See what you can find. So it's not the right answers. Literature not based on the right answers. It's literature based on the right questions. Are you doing literature or are you doing an assignment? If you're answering the questions, it's an assignment. If you're questioning the answers, it's literature. Literature, you know, the most authentic approach to literature is open-minded, exploratory. Every novel is a repository of independent ideas. You know, and, you know, none of us need to be told that not everyone wants children to read independent ideas. There are masses of people who want to control children's thinking, and they want to shut down alternative ideas from exposure. But there's this problem of intellectual freedom. So one of the healthiest and most wonderful things is just to give kids an array of books and just explore whatever ideas happen to be in that set of books. The ideas in classics are not controlled by, you know, like the Texas school board. They may be, but I hope not. What I find is that in the classics, ideas are not age graded. I mean, we're reading Alice in Wonderland, Wind in the Willows, Peter Pan, books like that, and they're not too young for me. I don't have to read down or something to read those. I mean, I'm just as engaged in the books as the kids are, and I've read them 27 times. The idea is, well, this is a 3rd grade book. No, it's not. You know, it's a famous book, and the fame is telling. The fame says something. Every novel is an inquiry into human nature. Every novel offers interpretive thinking. Interpretation is an advanced form of higher order thinking. It's one of the most advanced forms of higher order thinking. So we don't want to tell the kids in advance the theme of this novel is authenticity. We want to present the story and let the kids generate through their thinking and talking together words that might help articulate the idea, the core of the book. Good interpretation is about the book. It's not about the kids' bias. You know, well, it's true to me, in my opinion. Well, that isn't how it works. You know, a kid has the right to say that the theme of Frankenstein is that everything works out for the best. But that's not the theme. You know, we have to be responsible to the words of the book. And that's what I want to teach the kids. The words present the ideas. The best thing I ever learned is to trust the words of the book. So if just for example, let's take Camus, the stranger, and the word white. It had whitewashed walls. He began twiddling his white mustache. That strip of whiteness. The glare off the white walls. And so you begin to think, what's going on here? What is being communicated by this, this barrage of whiteness, a bleak white glare, white coffee, a white double collar, silky white hair, white faces. And of course, we're looking at something that's semi, at least, existential. It's existentialism. And the whiteness, the pervasive whiteness had to do with the emptiness of the soul. The search for meaning in a context where there was no meaning. That was the whiteness, the vacuum, the absence of all color. That was the theme. But the book gives it to you, see. We don't need to import Freudianism. We want to use the book's terms. Every novel is an opportunity to write an essay, or more than one. So I would say that literature is education's most enriched environment. It has everything. And arguments that cut literature to make room for test preparation are specious. If we want kids to be educated. Books are more important than tests. Books are more important than tests. And books don't lend themselves to nice little true-false answers and, that sort of thing. Real literature doesn't lend itself to that. At the end of the year, it's not about how many tests you took. It's about how many books you read. In the history of the world, has a single student ever begun the year thinking, oh, this year I hope we have more tests? What is the dream of the student's heart? Later in life, it's the books that we remember. And I don't want the kids to remember a list of symbols. I want them to remember Achilles and Hamlet, particularly Hamlet, and Hester Prynne and Mole and Peter Pan and Elizabeth Bennet and Scout Finch. I want them to remember that Frederick Douglass taught himself to read. I want them to remember that Tinker Bell was so little that she could only have one feeling at a time. The educational effect of literature is misunderstood. It's undervalued. It's underestimated. It isn't just stories. It's a massive exposure to all dimensions of language at its finest, to articulation, to the music of grammar, to vocabulary, to punctuation, paragraphing, ideas, everything. It's literature that immerses you in language and thought beyond your current perimeter. And that's what we want the kids to experience. It's the essence. It's literature that inspires literate learners. And there are no alternatives to that. So thank you for having me.
Well, thank you very much, Michael. We now have